Alright, so for problem number 4, or my 4, it might be your number 2, I don't know. We're given, let me change the color a little bit. Make it fancy. We'll do f of x is equal to 5 times the square root of x plus 3. They want us to find f inverse of x. Now there's a couple things before I even get started. I have to define the domain of f of x because there is a restriction. Remember, this stuff right here cannot be negative. So what's another way of saying cannot be negative? In other words, x plus 3 cannot be negative, which means it has to be greater than or equal to 0, right? So then for my domain restriction, if I solve for x, x has to be greater than or equal to negative 3. So that's my domain. Consequently, that defines my range on the inverse. So the range on the inverse has to be y is greater than or equal to negative 3. Okay? Alright, so let's crank through and do the math. So again, we're just going to say step 1, we're going to sub in y for f of x. So that gives me y equals 5 times the square root of x plus 3. We're going to divide both sides by 5. I get y divided by 5 equals the square root of x plus 3. Next step, oh, I'm sorry, that was step 1. Step 2 is we got to do x equals some stuff, right? So now I'm in the process of solving. So I'm going to square the square root. Whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other. That leaves me with y squared over 5 squared equals x plus 3. Then I subtract 3 from both sides. When I do that, I still have y squared, but what's 5 squared? 25. And then we'll just put minus 3 over here equals x. Next step, I'm going to flip-flop, so I'm going to have y equals x squared over 25 minus 3. Okay. Last step, I'm going to plug that in to my f inverse notation. So this just becomes x squared over 25 minus 3. Okay. Now, in your textbook, they actually write it a little different. Isn't this the same 1 over 25 times x squared minus 3? So that's kind of how they write it. And we said that the range has to be greater than so the first question is this a function? Is f inverse a function? Well, we could graph it, right? We can graph it and see if it's a function. So the first thing that we're going to do, or not the first thing, let's just double check and make sure it's the inverse. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in 5 times the square root of x plus 3. I'm going to change that to my red color now because I'm being fancy. Alright, and then down here, I'm going to say 1 divided by 25 times x squared minus 3. Now, we said there's a couple of things that we need to do. When you look at this graph, we said the domain and the range define each other. So the real question that we have to do, to define the domain of our inverse, we have to look at the range of our actual function. So if this is, what's the range? In other words, what are the possible y values for our function? Well, it's 0 or greater, right? So y has to be greater than or equal to 0. So let's write that down first of all. So over here to the side, we're going to say that our range has to be y is greater than or equal to 0. Okay. So that has an impact on the domain of the inverse. Remember, the range of the actual function has an impact on the domain. So because the range of the function, just by the very nature of the function, is y is greater than or equal to 0, then our domain has to be x is greater than or equal to 0. So now we go back to our graph, and we're going to have to, at the end of this in braces, put x is greater than or equal to 0. Boom. Now we have the true graph. Okay. So let's zoom in a little bit. And so I'm just going to take a screenshot of that. I'm still recording, you guys. All right. And I think that's it for that one. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, that's not an answer choice.
Yeah, it is. What's not?
You haven't bring my project up to me?
Yeah, I'm looking right at it. So hold on, let me stop the video.